Good day. My name is Elizabeth Nosek, and I'm the Curator of Education and Exhibits here at the Colorado Railroad Museum. I'm really excited to talk to you about one of my favorite collections here at the Colorado Railroad Museum. It's the William Henry Jackson Photography Collection. I started bumping into this collection during various research projects for different exhibits here at the museum. We finally decided to do an exhibit entitled Images from the Tracks, Photographs of William Henry Jackson. This exhibit focused on his images that are part of our permanent collection. My presentation today is inspired by that exhibition. I hope that you find William Henry Jackson's photography as fascinating as I have. Jackson began his career in 1856 when he took a summer job in a print shop painting display cards. He begins painting scenes on window screens, theater posters, and other advertisements. He then goes on to work as a photographic assistant in Rutland, Vermont, doing retouching. He is in Vermont when the Civil War breaks out and, along with many other young men, enlists. Jackson is part of Vermont's Rutland Light Guard, and he is assigned as the staff artist and sketches scenes of camp life as well as maps. He does not re-up at the end of his enlistment, but goes on to work as a photography retoucher. Retouching is defined as tinting black and white images with watercolor paints and sharpening the image with India ink. Now, it's during this period following the Civil War that Jackson meets, courts, and becomes engaged to a spirited young woman named Caroline Eastman. Sadly, the engagement does not last. He and his fiancée quarrel, and Jackson leaves Vermont, vowing never to return. It is this move from Vermont that goes on to define the course of his life. He follows the call west, working as a bushwhacker, a carpenter, a wrangler, a guard on wagon trains, and an art tutor. Eventually, he settles in Omaha, Nebraska around 1867, starting a portrait studio with his brother. He is commissioned by the Union Pacific Railroad to take 10,000 views along the train's route for advertising and promotional purposes. It is the photographs for the Union Pacific Railroad that catch Ferdinand V. Hayden's eye. Ferdinand Hayden led the U.S. Geological and Geographical Survey of the territories between 1870 and 1878. These surveys began with the Pacific Railroad Survey Bill, which Congress had passed in 1853. That bill was intended to find the best routes for railroads from the Mississippi River to the Pacific coast, but goes on to inspire the great surveys undertaken by the Department of the Interior after the Civil War. Jackson joined botanists, politicians, entomologists, and traditional artists as the documentarian of the group's trips, as well as recording the landscape they traveled through. During this time, Jackson found a lifelong friend in the artist Thomas Moran, who was also part of the Hayden expedition. The two men worked together to improve each other's artistic abilities as they worked to capture the landscape surrounding them. One example of this is the image of the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. Here is Moran's version, arguably a masterpiece. And here's Jackson's black and white photograph of the same view. And here it is after he retouched it with watercolors and India ink. In 1879, William Henry Jackson moved to Denver and opened the Jackson Photographic Company at 1413 Larimer Street in Denver. This successful commercial studio emphasized landscape photography and employed a mounter, a receptionist, and 2 assistants. Jackson made some 30,000 negatives of landscapes surrounding railroad routes for companies including the Colorado Midland, the Denver South Park and Pacific, the Colorado Central, and of course the Denver and the Rio Grande. Early in his career, Jackson carried the numerous glass plates, lenses, bottled chemicals, trays, and tripods, along with the actual cameras by pack mule into the rugged western terrain. This created many logistical and artistic challenges, including developing the glass plate negatives out of a small tent. These challenges were considerably eased with the advent of the railroad. Jackson began traveling by rail as early as 1869 after winning a commission from the Union Pacific Railroad to document the scenery along their route for promotional purposes. He continued using private cars throughout his career, especially when taking photographs for the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad, Mexican Central Railroad, Baltimore and Ohio, as well as the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad. He was even able to bring family and friends with him. The Colorado Railroad Museum owns two of the rail cars used by Jackson during his travels, the Rico and the B8. You can visit them at the museum today. Before we look at some of the William Henry Jackson images in the museum's permanent collection, it is worth discussing why this early photographer is seen as such a master of the medium. William Henry Jackson was among the first generation of photographers who strove to master the aesthetic issues of tone, texture, and detail in a medium that was monochromatic. His images were large in size and grandiose in scale, echoing the ideals of the time, most notably Americans' manifest destiny. Taught an appreciation for art and the basics of composition and style by his mother, Jackson developed an even deeper appreciation for composition techniques from his friend the artist Thomas Moran, who further developed his skill. Photography was a new medium ripe for exploration. Photographers tried a variety of methods to manipulate their images to ensure that they created the impact the artist was trying to achieve. Jackson is known for coloring his images. He also added or subtracted people, trains, or other items in his photographs to strengthen the story he was trying to communicate. We saw a number of Jackson prints as I introduced you to his story, and I thought it might be interesting to look a bit more closely at some of the pieces in our permanent collection. Our library boasts a couple of volumes. Colorado 1870 to 2000 juxtaposes historic photographer William Henry Jackson's images of Colorado's 19th century landscape with modern day images taken by photographer John Fiedler. Many of those images feature railroads. All illustrate the changes in our landscape over time. We also own the album of his photographs that are specific to railroad photography. The hand-colored print depicts Clear Creek Canyon west of Golden, Colorado. It is on the Colorado Central Railroad line and is dated to 1899. It was printed by the Detroit Photographic Company. The chromolithograph is mounted on paperboard and depicts Lake San Cristobal, near Lake City. It is part of the scenes along the line of the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad and dates to 1898. A chromolithograph is a colored image printed by many applications of lithographic stones, each using a different colored ink. The colorized print is also from the Scenes Along the Line of the Denver and Rio Grande series. It depicts Echo Cliffs, which are in the Grand River Canyon here in Colorado. Note the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad logo in the bottom left-hand corner. Both of these images were produced for general sale by the Detroit Photographic Company. The black and white print is the Canyon of Los Animas. Note the delicate colorization of the blue dress of the woman standing in the river. There are also small amounts of blue in the river water and hits of green in the surrounding trees. The snow caps in the background were hand-painted white. Now the image further depicts editing by Jackson in that many of the people were added to the image. Besides these images that were used to decorate depots and later sold to adorn the living rooms of individual families, Jackson also took panoramic landscapes using a special camera he developed for the purpose. This example of the technique depicts the Ophir Loop. Photography in the railroad provided the public with a new and more accessible way to explore the West's uniquely beautiful landscape. Photographers like Jackson capitalized on this by creating inexpensive stereo views and postcards families could explore at home in their own parlor. The stereoscope image is of Devil's Gates Bridge in Weber Canyon and was taken for the Union Pacific Railroad when Jackson had his studio in Nebraska. Here is another taken for the Union Pacific. It depicts Giant's Tower along the Green River. The stereoscope image here was done by Jackson's studio in Denver for the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad. and it shows the San Juan extension. Now, if you're unfamiliar with stereoscopes, a stereoscope took two images taken from a slightly different angle, such as the human eye would see. By looking through the stereoscope, the two images blended and you saw one three-dimensional image. This was home entertainment before the era of home movies and television. It allowed you to immerse yourself in the photograph in a way not possible before. Jackson's studio in Denver also printed small-sized photographs for people to enjoy. Here is a view showing Dome Rock in 11 Mile Canyon from the Colorado Midland Railroad line going east. The image was captured around 1890, and the company's logo is stamped on the back. The logo at the back of Jackson's photograph card changed over time. This image also acts as an advertisement for his business. The image on the front of the card depicts the hanging bridge of the Rockies. One of Jackson's photographs became the logo for the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad. It was used on timetables and china. William Henry Jackson's career as a photographer was not only one of the longest and most successful among American photographers, but also made a lasting impact on American culture. During his lifetime, Jackson's photographs adorned the parlors of millions of American households and helped to create national parks such as Yellowstone. The railroads perpetuated the romantic image of the American West by adorning railroad stations across the United States with Jackson photographs. Today, his photographs are preserved in the Library of Congress, History Colorado, the National Archive, Newberry Library, Princeton University Library, Scottsbluff National Monument, and of course, here at the Colorado Railroad Museum. Thank you for joining me today as we explore the small wonders here at the Colorado Railroad Museum.
Like, comment, share, and subscribe. Commenting and sharing in particular may qualify as virtual engagements for important funding programs like the SCFD.